Hello, I am Michael Walsh, and you are listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's March 22nd, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Michael Walsh about The Silver Coin. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, and it's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Michael is an Eisner Award-winning comic book creator based out of Hamilton, Ontario. In 2013, Michael co-created the Image comic book series Comeback, soon to be a major motion picture. After this, Michael launched a follow-up to the hit television series The X-Files for IDW. Since then, he's worked primarily with Marvel Comics on properties such as Star Wars, Spider-Man, The Avengers, and The X-Men, as well as adapting the Star Wars film The Last Jedi with writer Gary Whitta. In 2019, Michael was the artist and colorist of the hit Dark Horse and DC Comics crossover Black Hammer Justice League. His publishers include Marvel Comics, DC Comics, Dark Horse, Valiant, Humanoids, Archie Comics, Titan, Boom, Dynamite, and IDW. In 2021, Image announced The Silver Coin, co-created by Michael, a new horror anthology series for mature readers in which each issue will tell a tale of terror in a shared supernatural world. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Michael Walsh about The Silver Coin. Michael Walsh, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on the show.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask creators about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I'm not sure specifically which comic it was. I grew up just down the street from a comic shop in Stony Creek, Hamilton. Stony Creek is a suburb of Hamilton, and it was called Comic One. And me and my dad used to go all the time when I was a little kid and grab a comic book, and he would read it to me later on. I would suspect it was probably Ninja Turtles, which I was absolutely obsessed with as a little kid. So I probably it would be a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or a Superman or a Batman or something of that sort. But yeah, I still have a bunch of those old books in my bookshelf now.
Nice. No, lots of good influences there. So I'm wondering, who influences your work today as an artist?
I still like a lot of the classic guys, like Alex Toth, Jordy Bernay, David Mazzucchelli, and then of the artists that are currently working in comics, I'm a big fan of J.P. Leon. I'm a big fan of Chris Somney. Mike Mignola is probably the biggest influence on my work. I think that when I was originally a little kid, I wanted to draw superhero stuff, but when I started getting into Hellboy in high school, it kind of changed my aims for when I became a professional, and I knew that I wanted to do a little bit more genre work on top of the superhero stuff as well. So he kind of opened up my eyes to the vast possibilities of doing weird horror comics.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, we're here talking about your latest project, The Silver Coin. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about it for those who don't know about it, and maybe the origins behind the project too.
For sure. So Silver Coin is a new book from Image Comics. The first issue comes out on April 7th. I'm drawing the whole series, and then it's going to be a different writer on each issue of the series. So each issue will be self-contained in terms of that issue's story, but all the issues take place in a shared world, and they're building up towards a big story, a big climax. It's going to benefit readers who read the whole series from beginning to end, but it will also be able to be read just in single issues. I kind of conceptualized the idea of doing this kind of anthology style book back when I was working with Jeff Lemire on Black Hammer Justice League. And I had read a few books like Ice Cream Man that were anthology style horror books. And I'd read a few books that were, and I even participated in a few books that were anthology style stories where it was a different artist on each book. But I'd never read a book that had a different writer on each issue. So I thought that maybe I could talk to some of the writers that I had worked with previously, that I had a rapport with, and whose work that I really enjoyed as a reader of the medium, and see if they would be on board to create this big horror world where things are kind of crazy and wacky and It moved around different genres within like subgenres of horror. So there's kind of some slasher issues. There's kind of some Twilight Zone issues. There's some more absurdist horror. There's some cyberpunk horror as well. So there's a little bit of everything in the first 5 issues here. And yeah, so when I finished on Black Hammer Justice League, I knew I kind of wanted to get back into the creator-owned world, and I wanted to work with all these different people, so I didn't really know how to narrow down which project I was going to take, and I thought maybe this would be a good idea to just feel it out and work with a bunch of different people and consider my next steps in my career after. I ended up getting, so for the first 5 issues of Silver Coin, we've got Chip Starsky writing the first issue, Kelly Thompson writing the second issue, Ed Brisson writing the third issue, Jeff Lemire writing the fourth issue, and then I'm writing the fifth issue. And tying everything together, and I'm integrating like different imagery from issue to issue, and there's going to be crossover characters that appear in some issues and then appear again down the road. So there's a lot of fun to be had. I'm really excited for people to pick up the book and start reading it.
Sounds exciting for sure. Now, without giving anything away, is there any overarching theme or narrative that flows throughout the entire series of books?
I would say so. I think that there's a bit of a monkey's paw element, be careful what you wish for. And there's a little bit of a commentary on the cyclical nature of violence, and pain. And the more that you dwell on those things and hold on to them, the more they come back to you. So I think that there are definitely thematic elements that recur from issue to issue, and Jeff's issue 4 has a lot to say about that kind of cyclical nature of violence and pain, and that's a common thread throughout all of the issues so far.
Very good. Seeing as how you're the artist and you're working with writers, did their interaction with you and contributions change your sort of narrative or your thought process for the series of books at any point?
Totally. Yeah, it was really interesting because at the very beginning of the project, I only had a pretty vague idea of what I was going to be doing for my issue, which is issue 5. And it's kind of like without spoiling too much, but it ties everything together, and it's kind of the origin, and it explains a lot of the imagery that's in the other issues as well. But I only had a pretty vague idea of where I wanted that to go. And when I prompted the writers with some of the ideas that I had, I kind of just told them, go wild. And then as we get scripts in, everyone can read the scripts. And if you want to riff off of somebody else's script, feel free to. But if you want to do completely your own thing, do that as well, as long as it contains a specific few elements that I told them, then we were good to go. So you'll see some issues tie into other issues a little bit more, and some just completely doing their own thing. But I think that's something that I love about the series, is that you kind of never know what to expect or what you're going to get. And I think that there's a consistent quality throughout. So I'm really hoping people enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed working on it and working in this way. That's just kind of like a think tank of talented creators in comic books.
Absolutely, you can't go wrong. And the buzz so far before it's come out has been tremendous. So I'm sure people will thoroughly enjoy it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's been amazing getting all the feedback on my social media, on Twitter and Instagram and such. And I think that there really is a renaissance of horror in Western comics right now. I think there's a lot of really good comics that are playing with that genre, and it seems like there's a really big audience for it. That's something I've been saying for a while. For a long time, for years in my career, I would say, there's so many people that would love horror comics, but there's not really that many horror comics in the Western market. And, Walking Dead was kind of the big one that everyone would talk about, but there wasn't a lot surrounding it. And I think now we're seeing that there is enough of an audience to support a broad amount of books that are all dealing within that same genre.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. I've talked to other creators about horror being sort of the fashion, I guess, of the moment. And I'm wondering, just to get your thoughts on it, do you think it might be that, we're in this pandemic, and it might be that people are looking to horror comics as a means of escape? As we're dealing with these unforeseen times, do you think that maybe horror comics are something that people are turning to, have some fashion of control, I guess you could say, in the horror of the moment?
I mean, all forms of multimedia are escapism to a certain extent, and I think certain things are more escapist than others. Like I find like escapist fantasy specifically is a very strong escapist genre, like stuff like Chronicles of Narnia or Spirited Away, Neverending Story, stuff like that. I find really takes me out of what I'm stressing out about at the time. But I don't really know if there is any concurrence with what's going on with the world today. I think that really is just people have been kind of coming around on it, and it's topical. And I know for the 8 or so years that I've been in comics, half of the creators I talk to want to work on horror stuff, and they haven't really been given the opportunity because people in positions of power didn't believe that there was a market for horror as much as we as creators told them. And I think a lot of creators just said, well, you know what, I'm just going to do it, and then I'm going to put it out through creator-owned publishers, and if people buy it, they buy it, but I'm just going to make the books happen. And I think there was a few big successes in the last few years in horror and comics, and so people are putting a little bit more stock in it now. And I honestly just don't see it really going away. If you look at film, you get more horror movies than anything else because they always do decently well in the box office compared to what the budget of the films are. And it's kind of like I don't know. It's just like it's something that everyone can relate to in some ways. I mean, you don't relate to having a zombie, but everyone can relate to having fears and anxiety over things. And I think that there's a lot of metaphors in horror. The feeling of fear is a universal feeling that all humans fear, and I think that's why it's so relatable.
No, very good. Very good. No, I appreciate that. Good stuff. So we've talked about the silver coin. I know you've been going gangbusters on that, but is there anything down the road that you can talk about? Anything else in your future that you'd like to share with us today?
Can't really spoil too much of what I've been working on, but I've also been slowly chipping away at another creator-owned series that's kind of less mature horror and more PG-13 Spielbergian horror with a couple of my favorite writers. And then I've also been slowly chipping away at an all-ages fantasy graphic novel. So going back to what I had mentioned there about escapist fantasy, you'll like this one, John. It takes place in Newfoundland, and
wow.
It deals with some local folklore from Newfoundland, and it's not based on anything autobiographical, but I'm taking a lot of stuff from my life and integrating into the story as well. So it's going to be a graphic novel, 120 pages, and it should be announced by the end of the year. And I'm really excited about it. I'm doing it in a little bit of a different style than anything I've worked on before, but it's exciting to be writing and drawing a full graphic novel on my own right now as well.
Yeah, that sounds very intriguing and something to look forward to for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, where can people find you online to find out more about the silver coin and your future projects as well?
So you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram. My handle is at Mr_Walsh, and the Mr. is spelt out MISTER_Walsh, because Michael Walsh is probably the most common name for a man born between 85 and 95. So it's pretty much impossible to find it on any social media. Yeah, I'll have to give my potential children more unique names, considering they'll have the last name Walsh.
Very good. Well, Michael, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
Not specifically. I just say Silver Coin comes out, the first issue, on April 7th, and it's a creator-owned book, so every issue sold really helps the series along and helps the creators making it. So if you're a fan of horror at all, it would go really well on a shelf alongside something like Gideon Falls or Ice Cream Man. And I would say check out each individual issue because they're all so different and have a different tone, and they all have a unique cast of characters. So, feel free to check out the second issue, the third issue, the fourth issue, and then the fifth issue as they all come out. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you on the social media.
Thanks to Michael for the chat. You can discover more about Michael on Twitter and Instagram at MISTER_Walsh. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.